So in today's video, we're basically taking the right-hand mans of both of the main villains of Bleach and Naruto and pitting them up against one another. Although with Jugram and Yuha, it's a bit more obvious that Jugram is the right-hand man. In Naruto, Obito and Madara are kind of fighting to be the main villain, I suppose. But you guys get the general theme. That's basically what we're going for in today's video. If you enjoy versus content like this, or you enjoy power scaling, all that good stuff, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. But if you want to go that extra mile and really show your support and you just want extra content, you can click that join button, which gives you access to hidden content here on the channel, such as debates that I've done and past live streams. So if any of that tickles your pickle, go ahead and click that join button. Now, you guys know how we do things around here. We're going to go ahead and talk about Jugram first, and we'll talk about Obito, and then we'll move into the conclusions and kind of talk about how the fight would go down. So with all that being said, let's just go ahead and dive right into this. Now, I've already kind of covered Jugram a little bit when I did the Jugram versus Poseidon battle, but just in case some of you guys haven't seen it, maybe you guys are new or something, Jugram is heavily slept on in the Bleach community. People really don't understand how powerful this guy is. For one, it has a lot to do with people downplaying the power of full-bring Bankai Ichigo. I've just done 2 videos on Genjo and Tsukishima talking about the power of full-bring. But just to reiterate, basically, it's stated like 20 different times that Ichigo is either regaining the powers that he's lost, or he's gaining a power stronger than what he had previously in the full-bring. So by all accounts, the narrative and what's being pushed right now is that full-bring is stronger than anything Ichigo's had up until that point. The only thing that I find to be a little contentious is Mugetsu, because that's actually supposed to be some special higher dimensional form. So I think it's a little iffy if full-bring itself is stronger than the final Getsuga Tensho, but everything else, like the full hollow state, Dangai Ichigo, anything else is fair game. Which, I mean, honestly just makes the most sense. I mean, he surpasses the Vasto Lorde literally right after that fight with his new hollow form, and then Dangai Ichigo is quite literally just Ichigo going into the hyperbolic time chamber and getting like a 3-month training amp to fight Aizen, right? So neither of those forms are like super special anyway. So for him to be able to surpass him with this new full-bring form is absolutely fine. There's no inconsistencies there. But then not only does he get his completed full-bring, then he meshes his Shinigami abilities into that, then puts his Bankai on top of that, and then with all of that, Jugram still snaps his Bankai in half and treats him like a little clown boy. Which, I mean, that in and of itself already is good enough for Jugram scaling. Not to also mention that when he comes out of the shadow towards the end of the series, when he's about to fight Uryu, the little subtext that comes up is like, the strongest opponent reveals himself. Which that's pretty good for inverse scaling, because it just is more concretely putting Jugram at the right hand of Yuha. It's meaning that, like, oh, the Shootstoffel has gotten all these Ashwaulen buffs, but he's still above all of them. Which, I mean, also does make sense. Everybody thought that Jugram was going to be Yuha's successor. They all call him the Grand Master of the Sternritter, meaning he is, like, the leader of the Sternritter. But how powerful would this make Jugram? Because, well, full-bring Bankai Ichigo is pretty powerful. If full-bring is stronger than Dangai Ichigo, that's relative or just way stronger than 4th and 5th Fusion Aizen, the same guy that surpassed all Hollows in Shinigami, which would include people like Bankai Yamamoto, that would mean at the bare minimum he would be multi-solar system, because Bankai Yamamoto, just by merely existing with his Bankai, not even doing anything, just the mere fact of him existing was threatening to destroy the Soul Society. And we do know that the Soul Society has dozens of stars in it, meaning the realm itself would at least have to be multi-solar system in terms of its size to compensate for all those stars. There's also arguments for it being its own time space, as in like the Soul Society is its own universe. So Yamamoto threatening to destroy that would actually be a universal feat, so we'll kind of leave that as a high-end argument. And for those curious, that more comes from like Muken being infinite in size, which is confirmed even in the kanji. Like, even in the kanji, it just says this infinite space that we're going to fight in. But so it comes from that being connected to the Soul Society, and things that happen in the Soul Society can still be felt in Muken, so it might not be all that cut off from the Soul Society, especially because it's just like right under Squad 1's barracks. So if Yamamoto is going to be destroying the Soul Society and Muken is connected to that, then you would be destroying like this infinite pocket dimension, which would be a universal feat. Also, do keep in mind that this would mean he's stronger than Gremmy if they're saying that he's the strongest opponent, and Gremmy can just casually create multi-galactic sized pocket dimensions with like the utmost ease. So you could have Jugram anywhere from multi-solar system, multi-galaxy, potentially universal, anywhere really in that range. As far as speed is concerned, I mean, we've talked about this numerous times. The characters, when they get into the 1,000-year Blood War, if they have any just decent scaling whatsoever, they should be in like the millions of times the speed of light by this point. Just based off the fact that Ichigo in the 1,000-year Blood War with True Shikai, even lowballing, would easily be the speed of light, especially considering some of the stuff that he's done earlier on in the series where he's already relativistic in the first arc. So to say that he's only light speed in base, it's a pretty heavy lowball, but that's what we use when calculating the distance between the Soul Palace and the Soul Society. So basically how we find out the speed for stuff like the Mime Hage and the Ash Wallen is you take Ichigo, he's about the speed of light, you have him travel for about half a day. That will then give you the distance between the Soul Palace and the Soul Society. And then you have the Ash Wallen and the Mime Hage making that same trip in like 2.5 seconds, which generally leads to it being about 1 to 2 million times the speed of light, because, you know, Ichigo traveling at the speed of light for 12 hours is pretty massive. That's going to create a very massive distance. And that's not even accounting for like multipliers or anything like that. That's just the base speed of the Mime Hage when it like rushes up and base Yuha reacts to it. He just snatches that up. Or the Ash Wallen and how people like Letato, who aren't even really all that top tier, can dodge it. So for some of the higher tier characters, and especially characters like Ichigo or people that get a speed boost from using their different forms, dude, they could be pushing anything from like 10 to 20 million times the speed of light, so they're quite fast. But what about Jugram's abilities? What does he have in his arsenal? Well, aside from like standard Quincy abilities like being able to shoot out like the holy arrows, which are stated to erase the targets from existence, as when they fire them at hollows, it literally destroys their soul and removes them from the cycle of reincarnation. So they are quite literally removed from existence. There's also his ability to be like spiritually aware, as obviously he fights a bunch of ghosts, so Hashfold would have to be spiritually aware for that. There's his main script, which is the balance, which essentially means anything bad that happens to Hashfold, any misfortune, whether that be damage or like poison, or he trips on a rock or something, any of that misfortune gets transferred to his friend shield, which is a shield that he carries around, and that basically absorbs all the damage that he's going to take during a fight. And then he can then take all of that stored up misfortune and put it back onto his opponent. So basically, he just redirects all the damage that he takes. He doesn't take any damage, and then he puts it back on his opponent. So it's very hard to actually get any damage on Jugram. But not only that, it appears that he also has the ability to use the Almighty, as he actually says, "Your Majesty, being able to see the future is very troublesome, isn't it?" So he can actually see the future. He has the same precognitive abilities. The only thing that's a little doubtful is if he can hop between timelines like Yuha can, because he never demonstrates that ability. So it seems that he's only able to use the precognitive abilities of the Almighty, but not like the timeline jumping. He also appears to be able to use the black shadows that Yuha has, as when he appears to fight Uryu and Ichigo, the black shadows are like morphing and everything behind him, which then means he can like just absorb his opponents and devour them like Yuha did with Aizen, or like Yuha was going to do with the entirety of the Soul Society. In fact, if they have the exact same black shadow ability, he can also summon a whole bunch of little chibi goons like Yuha did when he sent them all down from the Soul Palace to the Soul Society. So the abilities that Hashfold has is actually surprisingly pretty diverse, but how is he going to compare with his opponent Juubito? So the unfortunate thing about Juubito is that he pretty much gets locked off from all of the good scaling because of his fight with KCM2 Naruto and EMS Sasuke. We could maybe try to finagle some things and say like he lost his will to like actually fight the two of them and that's why he lost. But it really does just make it very awkward to try to scale him because he's fighting two much weaker versions of Naruto and Sasuke. And then when they come back, I mean, base Naruto is scrapping with one-eyed Madara. And then he forces Madara to absorb the God Tree. So the exponential increase in their base forms alone is crazy. And then they get their 6 past forms on top of that. It makes it really hard to actually scale Juubito. But here's the weird thing too. Briefly, Obito and Kakashi have like a little scrap with Jubidara like right before they come in. And so maybe you could use that alongside the fact that Jubito's abilities still work on some of Kaguya's abilities. Like, you know, when he's able to open portals in her dimensions, or he's able to remove her abilities, or the fact that he just gives Kakashi his abilities and Kakashi's able to tear Kaguya apart, you could maybe try to backscale that to Juubito, since I would think it's pretty obvious that Juubito is in a much better condition than this, like, half-possessed, dying Obito. But you can see why it's really odd. It's very weird. Like, his scaling's not super just point A to point B. He's a very odd character, because I'm sure there are some people that would try to argue that the half-dying Obito, well, he's just stronger than Juubito. He just got a whole bunch stronger, even though that doesn't make any sense, because he's actually dying. There's also some weird oddities, like, you would think Juubito would be stronger than Sakura, because he's able to fight KCM2 Naruto and EMS Sasuke, and yet Sakura is able to, like, punch Kaguya in the back of the head and actually damage her a little bit. So you would think he actually has some scaling to those tier of characters. So, look, I'll provide two different tiers. There's the downplayed Juubito that only fights KCM2 Naruto and EMS Sasuke. And then we have the other Obito where he's like, well, he should be stronger than the sick and dying one. He should still be stronger than Sakura, who got, like, no boosts, no new forms at all during this arc. Should be stronger than her. So we'll have two Juubitos. We'll have one Juubito where we just look directly at what he does. We're just like, nope, all that other stuff, me no like it. It's not fun. I don't want any part of that. And then we'll have the other one where we kind of use our brains just a little bit. So if we're using the first Juubito, I mean, what? He's like multi-continental to planetary. The Ten Tails itself has like numerous like multi-continental feats, like the Ten Tails Cataclysm, or firing the Bijou Diamond that blows up the Allied Shinobi Forces HQ. It also scales above Kurama, who has enough power to turn the world into ash, which is not hyperbolic. I'm tired of people telling me that's a hyperbolic statement. Hyperbolic would be me saying that, like, look at that football player running down the field. He's running at the speed of lightning. It'd be like, no, he's just lightning fast. Like, he's just a quick person. Obviously, that's hyperbole, but in the data book, when they're trying to describe how powerful a Bijou is, and they say, oh, well, it's powerful enough to turn the world to ash, you can't call that hyperbolic. That's just actually how strong that thing is. And it's especially consistent with a lot of the other weaker Bijou having just casual country-level calcs. But anyway, if he's able to turn the world to ash, that would actually be a life-wiping feat, which is around multi-continental. Although, if you think that he's just gonna, like, blow up the planet and then it just dissolves into a big pile of ash, then you could argue that would be small planetary. But other than that, that Juubito really doesn't have a whole lot, because all of the really powerful scaling comes in when you get like Kaguya and full power Madara, like when these characters start coming in. So if we want to say that Juubito scales to that tier, then we have like multi-solar system Juubito, because Kaguya's dimension, as we see later on in Boruto, have stars in them. And so if Kaguya just is able to create these dimensions that have like these numerous stars or whatnot in them, then she would be multi-solar system. Although then comes the argument of the expansive truth-seeking orb, where it says it's going to be the start of a new time space. This tends to get very divisive because it just depends on how you interpret it. Because it says it's going to be the start of a new time space, so people interpret that as she has the ability to create new time spaces, which would be a fourth dimensional feat, because you're creating a whole new fourth dimensional construct to hold in a universe. On the other hand, the other camp is that she never finished, is that she never actually achieved that new time space. And so they don't believe she actually has that level of power. So it goes back and forth, really just depending on where you sit on that side of the argument. Do you think that, well, because it's possible for her to do something like that, she should have that level of power? Or do you think she never finished it, it never got to this like fourth dimensional level of power, so it doesn't really matter? There's also the camp where people don't think that it scales to Kaguya. Like, it's almost like the truth-seeking orb itself is the only thing that is fourth dimensional, and it never reached that level of power. So we'll leave that as like somewhat of a high-end argument. We'll leave that kind of on the table for Juubito, but I think it's pretty concrete that you can go with the like star to solar system level scaling, because Kaguya's dimension contains, you know, different stars in them. And if you want to say that Juubito does scale to Kaguya in some way, whether it be him scaling above his sick and dying self, him scaling above somebody like Sakura, etc., etc. His speed scaling is actually not all that bad if you want to give him a little bit of grace here. Obviously, everybody knows about the feat where KCM Naruto moves like 70 times faster than the Raikage. And if we're being generous, we can say the Raikage is actually the speed of light. I know the databook statement says, oh, he's nearing the speed of light, but let's just be nice to the Raikage. Let's just grant him being the speed of light. And so if Naruto moves 70 times faster than that, then KCM1 Naruto is like 70 times the speed of light. And yes, some people are going to say, well, I mean, that was his maximum output for speed. But again, let's just be generous. Let's just say that KCM Naruto is just generally that fast. Because Obito in base is able to scrap with him. Then he gets 6 past Sage mode when he becomes the 10-tailed Jinchuriki, which should be comparable to normal Sage mode, which is a 10 times physical amp because it scales above the curse mark. So then at like bare minimum, you would have Juubito being like 700 times the speed of light. Now there's obviously, again, as I kind of addressed, there's some issues there, but for obvious reasons, we're just going to be nice to Juubito and just grant him all of the oddities that we went over. Anything that seems a little odd, we're just granting for obvious reasons. But then when it comes to Obito's abilities, I mean, he's got a whole Bible full of stuff that he can do. Unfortunately, when he becomes the 10-tailed Jinchuriki, he loses the ability to use Kamui, which was really dumb, but I understand. Might have been too OP, might have been completely unbeatable. But aside from not being able to use Kamui, he's still very powerful. I mean, if he still has access to the Sharingan, he can use all the Genjutsu, which he was able to perfectly control a Jinchuriki, which are like supposed to hard counter Genjutsu because your tailed beast breaks you out of that Genjutsu, yet he was still able to perfectly control the Mizukage, even though, again, they were a Jinchuriki. So his illusionary ability is insane, and then on top of that, he also gains the perceptive bonus from the Sharingan, which makes it easier for him to perceive his opponents. But then he also has the Rinnegan, which is like the Sharingan, but on steroids, and he gets a whole host of different abilities with the Rinnegan. Unfortunately, he never uses them, really. I think the only thing that Obito uses the Rinnegan for is to create his own passive pain, per se, with the other Jinchuriki. But if he wanted to use the Rinnegan to its full effect, then he could do things like just absorb all ninjutsu or just absorb all energy-based attacks, since this is a versus battle and we're equalizing things like chakra and Ryatsu. So you could just absorb attacks. He can make like guns and knives and laser beams out of his body. I don't know how relevant that's going to be in this battle, but he can do it. He has the ability to push and pull objects, so basically he becomes a Jedi. He can summon really OP animals. That is, if he has the same animals that the passive pain do. Which, I mean, if he does, gives him access to very useful summons like, say, the Chameleon, which can go invisible, and he shares line of sight with it, so he can use it to make sure he has no blind spots on the battlefield. You can also summon the Cerberus dog, which literally just cannot die. It just keeps regenerating heads every time it's killed. You know, he could just start pulling out people's souls. He could start throwing himself in the Naraka path to bring himself back to life. Also, with 6 past Sage mode, he has, like, a heightened version of Sage mode, which already allows you to, like, sense everything around you and lets you use nature energy. Also, kind of want to mention his, like, durability and regeneration here, because Obito himself is already, like, one of the most durable characters in all of Naruto. Because not only does he just get blown up all the time, but he has, like, Kakashi stab him in the heart. He blows up his heart with a Raikiri, and Obito just goes on, like, he keeps talking like nothing happened. In fact, he's like, look at this, my heart's already gone, I'm already a soulless bastard already. Which it's like, dude, your heart got exploded. Like, how are you still even alive? Much less standing carrying on a conversation, how are you alive right now? He also gets all of the Bijou pulled out of him, which, I mean, as we see with literally any other Jinchuriki, if they get their thing pulled out of them, they just die instantaneously. But Obito just keeps kicking around, just keeps walking around, doesn't die instantly, just keeps existing. And then it takes the Ash Bone technique, which literally just disintegrates his body and turns it into dust and has it like start floating off in the wind to actually put this dude down. Like, his durability and his just absolute tenacity to stay alive is insane. I don't think that actually gets brought up enough where it's like, oh yeah, my character will just stab Obito in the chest. It's like, I don't think that's gonna do anything. Like, I think he's just gonna live through that. Like, I don't think he'll particularly care. But then outside of that, then you have like basic nature releases and whatnot. Like, he can use fire style and all that good stuff. Like, nothing super crazy outside of that. He also does have wood style as well, but he doesn't use it to the same like legendary degree that Hashirama or Madara use it as. Because Madara even pulls out the wood dragons, which sap out your chakra, and they basically sap all your energy out. But, you know, Juubito doesn't pull anything out like that. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and move to the conclusion round and talk about who's going to win this battle. So, if this is going to be like some normal battle where we don't do stats equalize or anything, I think it's pretty obvious that Jugram is just going to blitz and one-shot Juubito. If Juubito scaling brings him around to like multi-solar system and like 700 times the speed of light at best, then he's really not doing anything to Jugram, who's like multi-solar to multi-galaxy in that range, and then millions of times the speed of light. If we wanted to try to grant Juubito being 4D, like if we were really that nice, then we can do the same thing for Bleach characters. Because at least for them, it's way more concrete, where they actually just blatantly throughout all of Deicide talk about being these higher dimensional transcendent beings. So we can do the exact same thing and then potentially have Jugram being 5-6D, which is even better than the 4D that Juubito would have, and he would still be faster than Juubito. So without stats equalized, pretty obvious that Jugram's going to win this fight, but I always find those to be really boring. So let's actually talk about if their stats were equalized and they had to have an actual real battle. So first and foremost, it's going to be really hard for either one of these two to actually kill the other. Because as we talked about, Jugram moves damage around. He moves all misfortune and damage around, so he never takes the hit. His shield takes it for him, and then he puts it back on his opponent. But the problem is that Obito is just very naturally durable and has like some regeneration with the Ten Tails. And as we've established, some minor mismoving of the damage, right? Like just shifting damage onto Obito where it's like, ah, yes, there's a cut on your arm, now you're a little bloody. Like that's not gonna do anything, because this dude just walks around having like his soul pulled out and his heart blown up and doesn't even really care. Like he still uses all of his powers like nothing even happened. But in which case this does, but in this case at the very least, Jugram is on the offensive here. Because it's more like Obito being durable is not as good as Jugram just actually moving the damage around. Because then Jugram is actually not taking damage. So you could argue that as the fight goes on, Obito still would have more strain being put on him, because he's going to be getting more and more tired as he takes more and more damage, whereas Jugram's not taking any damage at all whatsoever. You could argue this fight would be over in like 2.5 seconds if Jugram just like fires a holy arrow at Obito and this erases him from existence. Or if Jugram just gets into CQC and just outboxes Obito and just like cuts his head off or something. I mean, do keep in mind, Jugram is capable of fighting and outpacing people that fight people that have been training with the sword for thousands of years. Whereas in Naruto, the scale is much more reduced. It's more like decades of experience that they're fighting. It's like, oh man, this guy's really good because he's been fighting with the sword, or like he's been doing taijutsu for like 30 years. So in Naruto, it's a bit more realistic in that way, but in Bleach, you just have characters that have been like, yeah, I've been training with the sword for like a couple thousand years, and you're like, oh, this guy's actually legit. He's pretty good. Everyone's basically Kojiro from Record of Ragnarok at that point. But at the end of the day, every win con that I can think of for Obito just kind of gets negged by Jugram's ability. Because for one, he can see all of that coming because he has precognitive abilities. And his ability just shifts misfortune around. So anything that Obito would try to do would just get moved over to his shield. The best win condition I can think of for Juubito is that he puts Jugram in a genjutsu, and then that somehow doesn't get counted as misfortune, and then he's able to like just stab Jugram and kill him or something. That's probably like the only way Juubito can get a W. But even then, it's a bit iffy because you would count an illusion or being put under a genjutsu as being misfortunate. So then you would think that would just go into the friend shield, like it would just absorb all of that misfortune. And then if anything, it would put Obito under that same genjutsu because it takes the misfortune and it reverses it back onto his opponent. So even then, it's just not looking too good for Juubito. Just for the like sad fact that Jugram's ability is really busted, and now that he also has the ability of precognition, he can see everything happening, so he doesn't even have to guess what the ability is going to do. He's going to be like, oh, this guy, he's going to fire this fire thing at me. Let me just raise up my shield. I don't got to worry about that at all. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this matchup. If I said anything that you disagree with, or you just want to talk about this video, you know, be sure to come into the Discord. Although, just make sure that you come correct, because if you come in there wanting to throw hands, you know, I'm going to take off the boxing gloves. I will definitely accommodate you. I'll take off the gloves and we'll box. But if you come in there and you're like, man, I just kind of want to talk about this, I'll be like, all right, buddy, let's just sit down and have a nice conversation about this video. But with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace late, guys.